The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. But it wasn't the violence that caught Clint Lawson's attention. It was the desperate sobbing of a woman clutching 3 children against the weathered fence of the general store. Clint reined in his chestnut stallion, watching as townsfolk hurried past the pitiful scene without a second glance. The woman's shoulders shook with each sob, her threadbare dress hanging loosely from her thin frame. The oldest child, a boy no more than 8, stood protectively beside his mother while 2 smaller girls, one barely walking, clung to her skirts. "Madam," Clint called out, tipping his worn Stetson back. "You all right there?" She looked up, revealing a face that might have been beautiful once, before hardship had carved lines around her eyes and mouth. Those eyes, though a startling shade of blue that reminded him of the Montana sky after a spring rain struck something deep within him. "We're fine, sir," she managed, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. Clint dismounted, boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached slowly. "Don't look fine to me. Name's Clint Lawson. I run the Double L Ranch about 3 miles west of town." "Lillian," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Lillian Summers. These are my children, James, Emma, and little Sarah." The boy, James, stepped forward, chin raised defiantly despite the fear in his eyes. "We don't need charity, mister." Clint couldn't help but smile at the lad's courage. "Didn't offer any, just wondering why a mother and her young'uns are crying outside Hargrove's store in this heat." Lillian wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Our wagon broke down 5 miles back. My husband," her voice caught. "Thomas passed 6 months ago, consumption. We were heading to my sister's in Helena when the axle snapped. We walked to town, but Mr. Hargrove won't extend credit for supplies, and the blacksmith wants payment up front to fix our wagon." The youngest child, Sarah, began to whimper, and Lillian bounced her gently, though Clint could see the exhaustion in every movement. "When did you last eat?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "Yesterday morning," James answered before his mother could stop him. Clint nodded, decision made. "Mrs. Summers, I'd like to offer you and your children a place to stay while we sort out your wagon. Got plenty of room at the ranch, good food, and my foreman's wife is mighty handy with an axle." "I couldn't possibly," Lillian began. "Ma," James interrupted, his voice small. "Emma's real tired." Clint glanced at the middle child, a girl of perhaps 5, her eyes heavy-lidded with exhaustion and hunger. "Madam, I understand your caution, but nightfall's coming and Redemption Creek ain't kind to those without shelter or coin." Lillian looked down at her children, then back at Clint. Something in his steady gaze must have reassured her, for she gave a small nod. "Just until the wagon's fixed. We can work for our keep." "That's fair," Clint agreed, though he had no intention of putting these exhausted souls to work anytime soon. "My wagon's down at the Mercantile. Wait here and I'll bring it around." 20 minutes later, Clint helped Lillian and her children into his wagon. He'd quickly purchased supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, and a small bag of peppermint candies that he slipped to James with a conspiratorial wink. As they pulled away from town, little Emma pointed excitedly at the vast expanse of prairie. "Look, Ma, flowers." Indeed, patches of wildflowers dotted the golden grass, purple and yellow against the endless horizon. Clint smiled at the child's delight, then caught Lillian watching him, an unreadable expression on her face. "Thank you," she said softly, so the children couldn't hear. "I don't know what would have become of us." "No need for thanks. Out here, we look after our own." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. These strangers weren't his own, and yet, something about this broken family called to him in a way he couldn't explain. The Double L Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house of sturdy logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and smoke curled invitingly from the main house chimney. "You live here all alone, Mr. Lawson?" Lillian asked, eyes wide at the size of the place. "Just Clint, please, and no, got about 15 hands working the place. Most live in the bunkhouse, except for my foreman Miguel and his wife Rosa. They have a cabin just beyond that stand of cottonwoods. As the wagon pulled into the yard, a stout woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Rosa," Clint called out, "we've got guests." Rosa's warm brown eyes swept over the bedraggled family, and without a word, she hurried forward to help little Sarah from the wagon. "Pobrecitos," she murmured. "Come inside. I have stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The transformation in the children was immediate. James, who had maintained his protective stance, visibly relaxed at the mention of food. Emma grinned widely, showing a missing front tooth, while Sarah reached for Rosa with complete trust. Inside, the main house was surprisingly comfortable. Well-worn but clean furniture filled the large front room, bookshelves lined one wall, and colorful rugs softened the plank flooring. Rosa bustled the family to a large kitchen table, already ladling generous portions of fragrant stew into bowls. "Eat first," she instructed. "Then we'll get you cleaned up and settled." Clint hung back, watching as Lillian helped Sarah with her spoon, though her own hands trembled with hunger. Only when her children had taken several bites did she begin to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. "I'll see to your wagon tomorrow," Clint said, breaking the silence. "Tonight, just rest." After dinner, Rosa showed them to rooms upstairs, one for Lillian and Sarah, another for James and Emma. Clean clothes appeared as if by magic, some belongings from Rosa's grandchildren who visited occasionally, and a nightgown of soft flannel for Lillian. When the children were settled, Lillian came downstairs to find Clint alone in the front room, sketching in a leather-bound book by lamplight. "Your wife has been very kind," she said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Clint looked up, surprised. "Rosa, she's not my wife, just Miguel's. Been with me since I started this place 10 years back." "Oh," Lillian twisted her hands in the borrowed nightgown. "I assumed." "This is a lot of house for one man. Built it with family in mind," Clint admitted, setting aside his sketch, a surprisingly skilled rendering of little Sarah reaching for a peppermint candy. "Never quite got around to the family part." Lillian took a tentative seat across from him. "May I ask why?" Clint considered the question. Most people in these parts knew his story, but Lillian was an outsider. Was engaged once, Catherine, daughter of a banker back east. Her father sent her out here to visit relatives in Helena. We met at a social, fell hard and fast. He paused, the familiar ache duller now than it had been years ago. She took sick on her way back east to prepare for the wedding. Cholera, didn't make it. "I'm sorry," Lillian said, and he could tell she meant it. "Losing someone you love, it hollows you out." "That it does." Clint studied her face in the lamplight. "Your husband Thomas, was it?" Lillian nodded. "We had a small farm in Minnesota, nothing fancy, but it was ours. When he took ill, we sold everything to pay the doctor bills. Didn't help in the end." Her voice caught. "My sister Martha wrote that she could take us in. It seemed the only choice. And now I don't know. Even if we fix the wagon, winter's coming. The children need stability, schooling." She looked around the comfortable room. "I envy you this place." "Took years of hard work," Clint said. "Started with nothing but 20 head of cattle in this patch of land. Built it all myself with help." Lillian's eyes met his. "You've done well for yourself." Something warm unfurled in Clint's chest at her words, not pity but genuine admiration. "Get some rest, Lillian. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Clint rose before dawn, as was his habit, and was surprised to find Lillian already in the kitchen, helping Rosa prepare breakfast. "Couldn't sleep," she explained when she saw him, a flush coloring her cheeks. "Thought I might make myself useful." Clint nodded, oddly pleased to see her moving comfortably around his kitchen, her hair loose around her shoulders, gleaming copper in the early light. The children still asleep. Like logs, first real beds they've had in months. After breakfast, with the children happily exploring the barnyard under Rosa's watchful eye, Clint and Miguel rode out to retrieve Lillian's wagon. They found it easily enough, a simple covered wagon with a broken rear axle, just as she described. "Can it be fixed?" Clint asked as Miguel examined the damage. The foreman nodded. But it will take time. The wood is rotten, not just the axle. This wagon has seen better days, amigo. Clint ran a hand along the weathered sideboard. Do what you can. No rush. Miguel gave him a knowing look. No rush, eh? The senora and her niños, they are staying with us for a while, just until they're back on their feet, Clint replied too quickly. Miguel chuckled. Of course. Just until then. They loaded the family's meager belongings into Clint's wagon and returned to the ranch. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Lillian insisted on helping with chores, cooking alongside Rosa, mending torn shirts for the ranch hands, even helping in the vegetable garden. The children flourished in the open spaces of the ranch. James followed Miguel like a shadow, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle. Emma discovered a passion for collecting eggs from the henhouse, and little Sarah toddled after Rosa, babbling happily. And Clint found himself lingering in the house more than usual, inventing reasons to check on his guests, to see Lillian smile, to hear her laugh, a sound that grew more frequent as the days passed. One evening, about a week after their arrival, Clint found Lillian sitting alone on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Mind some company? He asked. She smiled up at him. Please. He settled into the chair beside her, hat in his hands. Miguel says the wagon should be ready in another week or so. That's good news, Lillian replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Clint spoke again. Your sister and Helena, she expecting you by a certain date, Lillian sighed. No. She doesn't even know we're coming. I wrote when we left Minnesota, but who knows if the letter arrived. She twisted her hands in her lap. Truth be told, I'm not sure we'll be welcome. Martha's husband is a banker, very proper. 3 children and a destitute widow sister might not fit into their fine life. Clint frowned. You'd go all that way without knowing. What choice did I have? The farm was gone. We had nowhere else to turn. You have choices now, Clint said quietly. Lillian turned to him, her eyes questioning. The school in town needs a teacher, he continued. Previous one left to get married last spring. Children have to ride 10 miles to the next town for schooling now. I'm not qualified. Can you read, write, do sums? When she nodded, Clint smiled. That's more qualification than half the teachers out here. Town council's desperate. Hope flickered across Lillian's face, quickly replaced by caution. And where would we live? I can't imagine teachers' wages would cover much. Clint hesitated, then plunged ahead. You could stay here. There's the old foreman's cabin. No one's used it since Miguel and Rosa moved to the new one. It needs some fixing up, but it's solid, close enough to town for teaching, but… He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Why would you do this? Lillian asked softly. You barely know us. I know enough, Clint replied. I know James has a natural way with horses. I know Emma sings to the chickens every morning. I know little Sarah has started calling me Uncasint. He smiled at that. And I know you, Lillian Summers, are the strongest woman I've ever met. Tears welled in her eyes. It's been so long since anyone helped us without wanting something in return. I do want something, Clint admitted. I want you to be happy here, all of you. Before she could respond, Emma came bursting onto the porch. Ma, Mr. Miguel showed me how to lasso. Come see, Lillian laughed, wiping away her tears. I'm coming, sweetheart. She rose, but paused to lay a gentle hand on Clint's shoulder. We'll talk more about this, thank you. As October gave way to November, the Summers family settled deeper into life at the Double L Ranch. Lillian interviewed with the town council and was immediately offered the teaching position for the spring term. In the meantime, she took on the ranch accounts, discovering a talent for figures that impressed even Clint, who had always prided himself on his meticulous record-keeping. The old foreman's cabin was transformed with fresh whitewash, new curtains sewn by Rosa, and furniture that mysteriously appeared from the main house's storage rooms. James proudly helped Clint build new bunk beds for him and Emma, while a small crib for Sarah was crafted by Miguel from pine harvested on the ranch. It's perfect, Lillian whispered the day they finished. standing in the center of what would be their new home. "I never thought we'd have this again, a real home." Clint watched her face, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the small dimple that appeared in her left cheek. "It suits you," he said simply. That night, a heavy snow began to fall, the first significant storm of the season. By morning, the world was transformed into a glistening white landscape. The children were ecstatic, bundled into warm clothes donated by the ranch hands and Rosa, their cheeks rosy as they built snowmen in the yard. Clint found Lillian watching them from the porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. "First snow's always special," he said, joining her. "In Minnesota, we dreaded winter," she replied. "The isolation, the cold, but here it feels different." "Because you're not alone," Clint suggested. She turned to face him, snowflakes catching in her copper hair. "No, I'm not." She hesitated, then continued, "Clint, I've been thinking about your offer. The cabin, the teaching position, it's more than generous." "But," he prompted, sensing her reservation, "but I need to be sure it's right for us. The children have already lost so much. If we stay, if we build a life here and then." She didn't finish the thought. "You're worried I might change my mind?" Clint asked gently. "Not exactly. I'm worried about complications." Clint stepped closer, their breaths mingling in the cold air. "What kind of complications?" Lillian met his gaze directly. "The kind that happen when a man and woman live in close proximity, when children grow attached, when feelings develop that might not be reciprocated." His heart quickened. "And have such feelings developed, Lillian?" "I think you know they have," she whispered. "At least on my part." Clint reached out, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "Then we're both in trouble because I haven't been able to think straight since I saw you crying at that fence." A snowball exploded against Clint's back, followed by James's laughter. "Got you, Mr. Clint." Clint turned, grinning. "That's a declaration of war, young man." He scooped up a handful of snow, and soon the yard was filled with flying snowballs and shrieking laughter as Lillian joined in, her earlier solemnity forgotten. Later, as they all gathered around the fireplace in the main house, drinking hot chocolate, Clint found himself watching them, this family that had appeared so suddenly in his life. James, concentrating as he whittled a small piece of wood under Miguel's guidance. Emma, hair still damp from the snow, learning to knit from Rosa. Sarah, fast asleep on a quilt by the fire. And Lillian, catching his eye over her mug, a soft smile playing at her lips. "This is what Catherine and I dreamed of," he thought. Not the exact circumstances, but this feeling, this sense of completeness. As winter deepened, the relationship between Clint and Lillian grew stronger. They found moments to be alone, walking together after the children were asleep, talking late into the night by the fire, sharing books and stories of their pasts. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the lean years and the good ones. She shared memories of her childhood in Ohio, her brief happy years with Thomas, her dreams for her children's futures. Christmas approached, bringing excitement to the ranch. Clint rode to town one morning and returned with the wagon laden with packages. "Some things for the house," he explained vaguely when Lillian questioned him. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner with the entire ranch staff, Clint asked Lillian to walk with him to the old oak tree that stood on a small rise overlooking the ranch. "It's freezing," she protested laughingly as he guided her through the snow, a lantern lighting their way. "Worth it," he promised. "Look up," Lillian gasped. The night sky blazed with stars, clearer and brighter than she had ever seen them. "It's beautiful." "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Clint said. "I come here to think, to remember why I do this." He turned to face her. "I came here the night after you arrived, couldn't sleep, couldn't make sense of why I felt so drawn to help you, to know you." Lillian's eyes reflected the starlight. "And did you figure it out?" "I think so." Clint took a deep breath. "Lillian, I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still healing from losing Thomas, but I need you to know that I've fallen in love with you, with your strength, your kindness, your fierce love for your children. I love the way James tries to act grown up but still gets excited about candy. I love how Emma sings to herself when she thinks no one's listening. I love Sarah's belly laugh when I toss her in the air. Tears slipped down Lillian's cheeks, freezing in the cold air. I'm not asking for anything right now, Clint continued. Just want you to know where I stand. That cabin is yours, job in town is yours, regardless of how you feel. But if there's any chance you might someday, Lillian stepped forward, pressing her gloved fingers to his lips. I loved Thomas with all my heart, she said softly. I thought when he died that part of me died too. I never expected to feel this way again, especially not so soon, but life has a way of surprising us. She lowered her hand. The children adore you. James talks about nothing but being a rancher like you someday. Emma asks me every night if Mr. Clint will read her story, and Sarah. She smiled. Unca sint is one of her favorite phrases. And their mother, Clint asked, hardly daring to hope. Their mother finds herself thinking about you far too often for propriety's sake, Lillian admitted. Wondering what it would be like to be more than your tenant or employee, to be your wife, Clint supplied. Lillian nodded, her eyes never leaving his. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Clint leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Lillian's arms went around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Clint rested his forehead against hers. I had a whole speech planned. Was going to be proper, wait until spring at least. Lillian laughed softly. Since when has anything about us been proper? I cried at offense. You took us all home that day, and somehow, in the middle of grief and hardship, we found each other. I have something for you, Clint said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box. It was my mother's, been saving it, hoping someday. Inside the box lay a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. It matches your eyes, Clint said. I noticed that first day. Lillian stared at the ring, then back at him. Are you asking? I am. Marry me, Lillian. Let me be a father to your children. Let me love you for the rest of our days. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Clint slipped the ring onto her finger, over her glove for now, and pulled her close for another kiss. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. The children woke early, rushing to see what Santa had brought dolls for the girls. A pocket knife for James, candies and books, and warm new clothes for all three. One more surprise, Clint announced after breakfast, when wrapping paper littered the floor and the children sat amidst their treasures. Lillian stood beside him, her hand in his, the sapphire ring now properly sized on her finger. Children, she said, Mr. Clint has asked us a very important question. James looked up first, his eyes widening as he noticed the ring. Are you getting married? Lillian nodded. If that's all right with you three. Emma squealed and launched herself at Clint, who caught her easily. Does that mean you'll be our pa now, if you'll have me? Clint replied, his voice thick with emotion. James approached more cautiously. Our pa, our real pa, he was a good man. I know he was, son, Clint said seriously. I would never try to replace him in your hearts. But I'd be honored to be your pa too, in a different way. The boy considered this, then nodded solemnly. I think Pa would be glad. He told me before he died to take care of Ma and the girls. It's been hard. His voice wavered. I think he'd be glad you're helping me now. Clint knelt down, still holding Emma, and extended his free arm. James hesitated only a moment before stepping into the embrace. Little Sarah, not to be left out, toddled over and patted Clint's cheek. Unca sint, she declared firmly. Papa Clint soon, little one, Lillian corrected gently, joining the family circle. The wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1879, in the front room of the main house, with Pastor Williams from town officiating. Rosa had transformed the space with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, along with a few townspeople who had come to know Lillian through her preparations to become their teacher. James proudly walked his mother down the makeshift aisle, while Emma scattered pine needles, substituting for flower petals, and Rosa held Sarah, who wore a tiny crown of ribbons atop her golden curls. Lillian wore a dress of deep blue velvet, a Christmas gift from Clint that matched her eyes and her ring. Her copper hair was arranged in an elegant knot, with a few tendrils framing her face. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Clint kissed his bride to enthusiastic cheers from their assembled friends and family. The celebration continued well into the evening with food and music and dancing. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep in their rooms moved temporarily to the main house for the night, Clint and Lillian stood on the porch, looking out at their ranch, their home. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" Clint asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible again," Lillian replied, leaning into his embrace. "When Thomas died, I thought our story was over, but it wasn't the end, just a painful chapter. And now we start a new chapter," Clint said, "together." "Together," Lillian agreed, turning to kiss her husband as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. In the years that followed, the Double L Ranch thrived under their combined care. Lillian taught at the town school, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. The children grew strong and happy, James eventually taking over much of the ranch management, Emma becoming a skilled horsewoman and artist, Sarah following in her mother's footsteps as a teacher, and in time, the family grew. 2 years after their wedding, Lillian gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Thomas and Catherine, honoring those they had lost while celebrating their new beginning. On quiet evenings, Clint would sometimes remember that fateful day, a broken-hearted woman crying at a fence, 3 hungry children, and the split-second decision that changed all their lives. What might have happened if he'd ridden past, if he hadn't stopped? The thought was too painful to consider. Instead, he would gather his family close, his beloved Lillian, their 5 children, eventually grandchildren too, and thank God for second chances, for love found in unexpected places, and for the courage to open his heart when it mattered most.